Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Unreal Studio to Revit webinar. My name is Daryl Bear, and I'm going to basically be walking you through what it's like to work in Unreal Studio today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. We're super excited about the news that we have our Revit plugin available for you to use immediately. Super, super cool news. So what is today about? Well, basically what we're going to be doing is taking you from a journey to get your Revit data into Unreal, and it's kind of broken down into three sections or three buckets. So the first thing that we're going to be talking about are some of the basics. So essentially, how are we going to handle getting data out of Revit into Unreal Studio, and what exactly are you going to get when you do that? Like, what's going to come across? So that's the first thing that we're going to talk about. Pretty basic stuff. Then we're going to jump into some of the look development tools inside of Unreal Studio, where you'll get exposure to how we approach making things look fabulous. Basically, that's really what it's all about, and how we can use the power of scripting to help us assist us in kind of automate certain procedures, because that's really one of the great things about Unreal Studio is its flexibility and its adaptability to generate a pipeline around the platform. And then the final thing that we're going to be looking at are some slightly more advanced concepts and how we can use Unreal Studio to build interactive experiences and really take your data to the next level. So everything I'm going to be showing you in this presentation is relatively high level. It's a demonstration. This is not, a tutorial where it's feature by feature deep learning. We have a whole separate crew of people that work on that you should all be aware of. The LMS team is out there actively creating curriculum and classes. This is very much about exposing you to the possibilities that Unreal brings and giving you kind of a first look that hopefully will inspire you to take the leap into working in Unreal, because it really is pretty special. It's really pretty fun. So a couple house cleaning things before we begin. Portions of this presentation are recorded. There's 4 videos that we'll be playing. There'll be a slight pause in between the videos once we get to that section as I cue each one up. There's just a little bit of lag there, so don't let that bother you. It'll only be a couple seconds. And we'll have some slides that are going to be kind of at the beginning of the deck that we're going through, and then there'll be some Q&A at the end. So there's ways that you can interact with us. There's a interface in widget bar, which I'm sure many of you have found, as some of you have obviously found the question and answer, as well as the group chat. So these icons on the bottom allow you to basically communicate back with us. And we want to hear from you. We want to be able to try to answer as many of your questions as possible. Sometimes they come pretty quick, so it's hard for me to get through them all. I have Eddie Perlberg on also with me helping out. So Eddie is actually part of the team that does the learning for the enterprise business, and he's here to assist me in answering your questions today. So there's a few of us here. Luthia is also on the line, so you might see some responses from her as well. So at the end of the webinar, we will be sending links out for you to watch a replay, or if you want to share it with your friends. Hey, George George from Atlanta. I'm from somebody from Atlanta also. Aaron, how you doing, buddy? So what we're going to be doing today is basically giving you a quick overview of what Unreal is all about. So it's got a rich legacy. This tool has been around for a long time, and there's a lot of people using it, not just people playing games. There's actually 3 million active users currently using the editor to create things, games, enterprise business presentations, AEC things, film and TV things. There's just so many use cases for Unreal Studio, and many of those 3 million users are just doing amazing revolutionary work with the tool. So don't be afraid to jump in. Because there's so many users, it also means there's a lot of knowledge out there. If you're trying to figure stuff out, Google is your friend. We have an amazing group of educators on our team, and then with the docs and the Google, you're going to have no problem finding the answers to the questions that you may have. Now, I mentioned the enterprise team a few times. We're a dedicated group of people specifically focused on taking game-level tools and generating a level of usability on top of it specifically for enterprise customers. So making things like the Revit plugin and like the multi-user template. There's lots of things that we're going to be seeing today that the enterprise team is responsible for, and it's really trying to democratize this technology so that everyone can use it. So the last thing that's a couple other bullet points is we're growing, and this is something that was really fascinating to us. CG Architecture ran a survey, and we were actually one of the fastest growing and most used rendering engines in CG Architecture's review, which is pretty amazing because these are people that are just self-adopting. They've figured out Unreal Engine can do amazing things, and they started using it, and that's really why we're here, to try to help accelerate that and really start to foster this business. So to do that, the beta is still currently free. We recently announced that the beta will remain free for at least almost a whole full another year. So there's no reason not to jump in. The tools they're ready for prime time, and they really don't cost you anything except time and an investment in your future. So with that said, what can we do with Unreal Engine? Well, there's lots of things that you can do. There's obviously the traditional marketing, so still media output, animation output, so QuickTimes or AVI movies, things like that. But really where its power lies is in the ability to make interactive applications and create experiences with your design data, both in AR and VR, as well as mobile devices or streaming off of Amazon Cloud. So there's just so many different ways that you can deploy this data. And that's really what we handle at the engine level. Because we're a gaming company underneath it all, we need to basically communicate with all these different platforms. So you author once in the editor, and you can then deploy to a variety of different platforms, everything from a mobile phone all the way up to the most hardcore PC out there. So we handle all of that for you. Now, for those of you who got here without going to the unrealengine.com/studio site, that's where you're going to go to get the technology. We actually have a link that's underneath the little paper icon that will give you the accessibility directly to go get Unreal Studio, as well as the Revit plugin. That's going to be right there for you. There's also access to get to the online learning, which is, again, a great resource. Really, really super cool that they've been investing so heavily in the online learning. So without any more, let's jump into the pre-recorded section of this. So again, this is going to be 4 videos. They run about a half hour, and they'll give you a nice window into what Unreal Studio is all about with Revit data. So let's go ahead and cue that up and get rolling. Thanks, everybody.
So here we are inside of Revit, and this is the asset that we're going to be using for the presentation. It's a school building, and it's got a pretty large floor plan. There's a bunch of classrooms, there's some basketball courts, and an auditorium sort of on the front side of the building. What we want to do is we want to export this out as a Datasmith file using the plugin that you would have downloaded and installed into Revit. So this is really simple to do. All you have to do is jump over to one of your 3D views, and whatever is currently visible or active in your 3D view is what's going to get exported. So we'll go ahead and kind of tumble this around so you get a sense of what this guy looks like inside of Revit, and we'll go ahead and we'll export this out. So the exporter is underneath the add-ins, and then there's the Unreal Datasmith file, which is going to save this out in the format that Unreal Studio can open natively. So we'll go ahead and we'll export this out, and we'll just save that guy as number 17. All right, so while this is exporting out, what we're getting is the geometry with the instances, obviously the hierarchy. We're going to get the materials, the cameras, the lights, as well as all the metadata and the families. That's really important because that's what gives us the ability to do some really creative and powerful things inside of Unreal Studio. So we'll import in that Datasmith file, and there's one thing that you're going to want to do. You're going to want to change the static mesh options from the defaults to be a little bit higher. What's happening is when Unreal imports in the Datasmith file, it's going to generate a second set of UVs automatically for you using a really awesome algorithm. And that second set of UVs is going to handle all the light building operations. So when you're trying to capture that global illumination, it's going to get stored in these light maps. So you want to make sure that the resolution is a bit higher so that the UV layout looks a little bit better, as well as the maps are big enough to hold the information for the light building process. So we'll go ahead and we'll import this in at 128 and 1024. So now we have the Revit data imported into Unreal Studio, and it looks pretty cool. Obviously, all the materials came across, as well as all the geometry, the families that have come across in the form of layers. So this is basically where you're going to begin starting, and it's a pretty good foundation. If we jump in here with a bookmark, you can see that the Revit materials look okay. I mean, they look better than they did in Revit, obviously, but this still isn't really that awesome looking. So what we want to do is we want to start to refine the look of this and start to give it a little bit more polish. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to jump over to our skylight, and I'm going to put that to movable so that we can get some distance-based ambient occlusion in there. So that helps a fair bit. Really what we want to do, though, is we want to get away from these Revit materials as fast as possible. We want to start replacing these Revit materials with really cool high-end materials built in Unreal. So how do you do that? Well, there's a couple different ways of doing it. One way is to just simply drag and drop. So if I jump over to some materials that I've already got set up in my scene here and I start dropping this on here, you can see that that concrete obviously looks a little bit better than the Revit, high strength concrete that came in. And this is going to take some time, right? Like you might have hundreds of different shaders that you want to replace with high-end Unreal materials. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to be using some Python scripting to automate that. This is really one of the most powerful things about Unreal Studio is the ability to build a pipeline. So the idea is we're going to have a simple little script, and it's really straightforward. So it's basically, these 4 lines build a little machine called replace material, and then replace material goes through and it looks for the old material and it replaces it with a new material. So the idea is that you can make a house set of rules that you basically go through and say, every time I import in my Revit files, on import, run this script and replace those Revit materials with my super cool Unreal Studio materials. So what's it look like when we run it? Well, let's go ahead and jump over here and do that. So all we have to do is execute the Python script from the File menu. So we'll go over here and we'll browse out and grab a script that's going to run through and replace all of my materials that we currently see with ones that are just basically better. All right, so let's just zoom in here and check out what happened with that Python script. So we've replaced all the shaders with very high-end Unreal shaders. So we've got these really nice reflections happening on the glass. I've got this super cool brick that was actually built up using substance sources. So substance sources come with Unreal Studio. You get 112 of them for free. These are really high quality textures. They have a procedural nature to them so that you can edit them and modify them and get a variety of different looks and feels out of them. So I use those to generate the maps that are driving this brick shader. And ultimately I took those maps and I pumped them into a very sophisticated shader. So I'm going to turn off the auto exposure here and we'll just kind of explore and look at this brick texture. So you'll notice as I move my camera around this guy, I get this sense of displacement in there. It's actually being done with a parallax map, so it's much more sophisticated than just a simple normal map. You'll notice as I move across this guy and kind of orbit around, you can see that kind of crack, occluding the mortar, and then the mortar comes back out as you move around it. So it gives you basically like a real-time displacement. Super, super cool, very, very high-end shader. And I'm doing the same thing down here on this concrete too. If we get kind of close to this guy, you'll notice that there's actually little holes in that concrete. And again, that's using that parallax map. Obviously, we have a really nice high-quality floor inside of there. So those are the types of things that you can get with the Unreal shaders. Obviously, it's going to look significantly better than the materials that came over from Revit. And that's really what it's all about when you're using Unreal Studio. So the next thing that we want to do is go ahead and take this to the next level by baking in some lighting. So baking the lighting is going to use that secondary set of UVs that we talked about on the file import. And all you have to do is go up here and say build, and then build lighting. And what this will do is that it's going to calculate all the global illumination and store it in the form of texture maps that are on those secondary UV channels. And the end result is going to just kind of drive that visual quality a little bit higher than it currently is. All right, so let's check out what that light build looks like. And the school's actually starting to look pretty awesome. What we want to do now is we want to kind of give this a final polish, and we're going to be using the post-processing volume to do that. And this really is one of the most powerful and coolest tools inside of Unreal Studio. Post-process volumes, one thing to keep in mind is you can have multiple post-process volumes in your scene. So you might have one that wraps around for the exterior of your building, and then when you enter the building, you can have a separate volume. And once you enter into that volume with your camera, that's going to take over the control of what the look and feel of your render buffer actually looks like. So I've already got a post-process volume in my scene that I've kind of dialed in, so I'm going to go ahead and turn that on. And as soon as we do that, you can see that it got a lot poppier. I really kind of pushed into the mid-range there, and I did that using the film control. So it was really the toe that's really kind of giving me that mid-range pop. In the process of doing that, though, I got a little bit of a kind of purple tinge to this, so I'm not totally loving the color. So I want to start to color correct that. Now there's lots of different ways that you can go in here and start using, all these different color correction things for broken down in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So very sophisticated color grading systems built in. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to go ahead and throw a color LUT on top of this view. And I'm going to use one of the LUTs that we actually ship with. So if you just come up here to browse and search and type LUT, you can see that we have a variety of different LUTs. So if I just grab that daytime LUT and I kind of toggled that on and off, you can see how it kind of got that back into the color range that I really wanted. So that's pretty cool. It's got a lot more pop to it now. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to start to go ahead and play around with some of the kind of cool lens flare effects and glowing effects. So the sun's sort of hanging out up there. As I move my building behind that, you can see a little bit of bloom kind of moving over to the edge of that building. What I want to do is I want to get a lot of bloom in my scene. I want the whole thing to feel kind of angelic. So what we're going to do is we're going to come up here to the bloom section, and I'm just going to overdrive that. So we're going to take that intensity up, and I'm going to put this up to something like a value of 4. And as soon as I do that, you can see the whole scene is blooming out, and it starts to really get this, really pretty cool look. Now, if you didn't want every pixel to bloom, you can use the threshold. And if I hover over top of this, you can see -1 means it's physically correct. All pixels bloom equally, and the higher you go, then only the hot spots will start to bloom out. I'm going to leave this at a value of maybe like -0.5 or something like that. So it's still got a lot of cool bloom happening here, but it's not quite as extreme. Now, as I start to move my camera back over here, everything's kind of blown out. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn back on our exposure settings so that it kind of does this little auto exposure. And you can see now we start to get a little sense of that sun kind of coming across there. And this is starting to look really, really pretty good. I'm starting to really like it. So the next thing that we're going to play around with is the camera system. And there's some awesome controls for doing cinematics inside of Unreal Studio. Let's check that out now.
Okay, guys, so I just
The next
pushed
thing
the
that we're going
second
to be
video.
looking at are cinematic cameras and how we can animate them with the camera sequencer. So I've already got several cinematic cameras in my scene. Let's just go ahead and view through one of them. We'll go to camera 4. And I'm going to turn on a more complete version of my environment. It's just a parking lot with some grass and some trees that were done with speed tree that have a little bit of animation on them. So if we start to fly into these trees with our camera, you're going to see that the cinematic camera automatically has, this really nice depth of field effect happening. And one of the things that's kind of cool about the cinematic camera is, and I'm actually going to turn down our exposure a little bit here. Let's go to our post-process volume and just kind of crank that down to -0.5. Kind of darken that a little bit. Yeah, we can even go a little bit lower. Go -1. Cool, that looks pretty good. All right, so what we want to do is we want to start to play around with some of the attributes on the actual camera. So you'll notice that these are basically like a real camera. So you first define what the film back is. Is it a crop sensor or is it a full frame camera? So we'll just leave it as a 16:9, but I'm going to switch the lens from being a universal zoom to being a 50mm prime. So as soon as I do that, you can see that we get this kind of nice shallow depth of field happening, this out of focus trees, you get this really nice bokeh effects. And the thing that's so cool about this, if I kind of fly into our building here and we'll zoom up on these chairs, and once I do something like that, I'm probably going to want to change that exposure actually back to where it was before. So we'll go back into our post-processing volume, and we'll just put that up to something like, I don't know, 1. Yeah, give it a nice bright shot in there. So one of the things that's kind of cool about this is if we go in here and we play around with the camera's focal plane, we'll just turn that on, and I start to drop this down, you'll see there it comes. When we get, like a really close focal plane, we're going to get this crazy shallow depth of field. But what I want you to notice is how buttery smooth the bokeh is. It's basically super, super fast. It's like free, but it just looks, crazy, crazy cool. Beautiful, beautiful depth of field effects. And as you fly these cameras around then, with this crazy depth of field, they just look, it's just awesome. It's such a nice look. So that's what we want to use to go ahead and start to set up a couple of different camera moves as these cinematic cameras. So how do we do that? Well, we just go up to the cinematics, and in the cinematics, you can see that I've actually already got an edit that I've started. So if we view this camera and kind of zoom through here, you can see we're kind of just doing a simple little push in on our building here. And I'm going to actually turn down that exposure a little bit. Actually, you know what? I can just clamp it like this. We'll go to the game exposure. So what we want to do is we want to get a new edit in here. So to do that, all I have to do is right click and then select what camera I want. So we'll just grab this one called camera zoom, which is going to put me out here. So with that done, we can just sort of jump back to our keyframe. I'm going to take this guy and I want to drive that camera. So I'm going to basically just say S to keyframe it. You can see I've just keyed it. We'll move forward out, I don't know, about 600 frames, and then I'm just going to kind of zoom this camera right into that staircase. So we'll just kind of fly in by those windows with that cool reflection, and it's set to auto key. So as soon as I do that, you can see that it's going to, we'll just view through our edit camera. In a matter of 2 seconds, we now have some sequenced cameras with a little cut sequence in there. And it's that simple to start doing animations inside of Unreal Studio. Now, if you wanted to, you could then just render this guy right out to, out to a movie, out to a QuickTime movie or an AVI file. Very, very straightforward. Also, keep in mind that anytime if you want to do a high-res screen grab, there's no reason why you can't just say, you know what, I want to get a high-res snapshot of this guy at 4x my buffer size. So that would be like, a 4K render or an 8K render. Really, really fast. They're going to happen in a matter of seconds. So it's perfect for doing, still work and animation work. So obviously, now that we've kind of done the basics, let's jump into some more elaborate and complex things. Next, we're going to talk about metadata, and this is one of the most powerful features in Unreal Studio. You can use metadata to do all kinds of cool things. You could use it with Python to generate some scripts that will batch process things, or you could use it with Blueprint, our visual programming language, to create tools that work in both the editor and in the runtime. Runtime is going to be the gamified version of your asset. So if you're trying to create an experience for your clients or your customers, the runtime would be what you would give them. And there might be some tools or some things that you want to do with that metadata. And I'm going to show you a simple example of how we can use metadata to generate a call out or a text tool that basically knows where I'm clicking and it gives me information based on what I've touched. So how does that work? Well, the first thing is metadata lives on the geometry, right? Every single piece of geometry that comes in, if you go to its user assets, it's going to have a variety of different things. So what we want to do is we want to query that information when I click on it in the runtime. So to do that, you build a tool in Blueprint. So this has already been built up. We'll just drag and drop the tool into our scene. And I'll just edit this guy so that you can get a sense of what the tool actually does. So what it's doing is it's finding out where I'm clicking. So all these nodes basically come together, figure out where I'm clicking, and then after I've clicked on something, it's going to come over here, and this is really the magic. The fact that it can query that Datasmith user data, and I can tell it which value I want to grab or what key I want to grab. So for this example, I'm using name, but it could be cost or size or an array. It doesn't really matter. I just went with name because every object in here has a name on it in the metadata. So that is basically what the tool does, and then it basically dumps out that information into the little machine that's going to generate the text and the call out, and it's got a certain length to it, and that's pretty much it. It's not that complicated, and you end up with a really cool custom tool in your runtime. So let's go ahead and start up our runtime by hitting play, and just like that, we can kind of zoom around here, and let's just kind of fly in on this guy and click on this, and you can see, there it is. It's just my little text tool telling me what I'm actually touching and clicking on. So super powerful, super easy tool, and that's really what creating things in Blueprint is all about. So the next example that we're going to do is we're going to build up a tool ourselves that's going to put a user interface on our screen and allow us to drive the sun. So let's check that out now.
Okay, I'm queuing up the next video, guys.
So this is pretty cool. We're going to be building a tool in Blueprint that allows us to animate the sun across the sky with a UI element in the runtime. And we're going to be using the new Sun Positioner that came in 4.21 to help us along. So Sun Positioner can be found in the content underneath Sun Position Content. You just drag and drop that into your scene. And if you hit the G key here, you can kind of frame in on that guy. You'll notice that you get this cool little compass that shows you basically which way north is, and you can specify a lat and a long to drive this. So it takes the old sky system and it adds some intelligence on top of it. So if we give it a little bit later in the year here, kind of midday or midsummer, so we get kind of high in the sky sun, and as I start to swipe through this, you can see it updates the sky as I move, and it actually updates the sky sphere too, so you can see the color change of the sky sphere in the background. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the north offset to kind of get the sun on the front side of our building here, somewhere kind of like that. And what we want to do is we want to just sort of run through some hours of the day like this, but we want to, instead of using the editor to drive this, I want to be able to drive it in the engine, in runtime, as I'm experiencing the design with a heads-up display or a UI that I create in Blueprint. So how do we do that? Well, it's actually only about a dozen nodes to create this tool, and I'll walk you through the process now. It's really pretty awesome. So let's just put this to -150. I think that'll look a little bit better. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to create our user interface element. So we'll just go over to our content folder. We'll right mouse click inside of here and we'll say create a widget blueprint. So we can call this something meaningful like DTO2 and double click on this guy. And this is the graphical design environment for creating UI elements. So pretty straightforward stuff here. We're just going to drag a slider out and we're going to make the slider big, you know, something kind of large, like, oh, that might be a little crazy. We'll go a little smaller. And I'm also going to drag just a text out and we're going to tell it that this is, of course, our sun, and I think we're going to grab hours will be what we want to get. So we've got our UI. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create the machine that's going to take this UI and drive this blueprint attribute. So we're going to do that in the graph. So we're going to create a couple of different things. So what we want to do is we want to have the event construct something. So the first thing we need to do is we need to basically hijack this hour slot. We need to create a reference object so that we can update it in the runtime of this blueprint object. So how do you do that? Well, we're going to basically grab the blueprint sun position. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say get all, and we want to do get all of a class. So we want to basically get that blueprint sun position. So now that we've got that, we need to extract that information and hold it. So let's just drag this out and we'll just say get, and we want to get a copy of that information that's just going to sit there. And then we just need to promote this into a value. We're gonna get that information and hold it. So we'll promote that to a variable, and then we'll just make sure that we pipe that information. So this 4 nodes is basically going through and getting information from the sun position and holding it. And then we're going to call this something like, I don't know, sun D. So that's our variable that we've made. So then the next thing we want to do is we want to create something that's going to drive that and pump in the hours. We want it, basically, I think the hours is what we're going to change. It seems like the best one. So we need to start to create a machine that's going to let us get that slider information and drive that variable. So how do you do that? It's pretty straightforward. We're going to drag this out. This is that variable that we just made, and we're going to use that to update the sun. And what we want to do is we also want to use this to set the hours. Actually, I think hours is probably the best one. It's going to show the best. So we're going to use that to set the hours. So we've got our hours that we want to set, and now we need to drive that hours with something. So what do we want to drive it with? We want to drive it with this slider 93 that we just made when the value changes. So on value change, I want an event to happen. So we're going to grab that on value change, and this is going to end up driving this guy, but we don't want to just pipe the value straight into the hours because that slider only goes 0 to 1. So we need to drag out of this guy and remap that range. So we're going to do a map, and it's a clamped. So we're going to basically say 0 to 1 is what our slider was, and we'll probably go from, I don't know, like 7 in the morning to like night. And then we'll just put that right there. So what we've done is we've now got our little system that's basically going through, it's getting information from the blueprint, holding it in a reference, and then we're using that to basically update the sun. We're using that slider to go through, remap the range, and then update the sun. All very, very simple stuff. So let's just go ahead and compile that. We'll hit save. That's going to work. So now we've got this UI element, but we need to tell Unreal that we want that to display when we hit the play button, when we launch our runtime, because you could have multiple UIs that you want to have happen at various times. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our level blueprint. So that's going to be, you know, the blueprint for the whole level. And we're going to tell it that we want to, on event play, create that widget. So we're going to say create a widget. And what widget do we want to grab? Well, we've got this one that we just made, DTO2. And that's pretty straightforward. So now we're just going to basically grab this out and just say add to viewport. So just like that, we're now going to add that widget to the viewport, so we can hit save and compile. And now if we come over here and hit play, you can see we've now got our hours slider that comes up, and as I start to drag through that guy, I get this nice UI driving that blueprint sun sky system, and it's just awesome, super, super fun. So that's how easy it is to start building up interactive experiences that you can basically use over and over again. Really, really straightforward stuff.
All right, queuing up the fourth and final movie for you guys.
So the next thing that we're going to do is create an experience that we can share with multiple users using the new multi-user template. And really, this is pretty straightforward because most of the hard work has been done in the template. So let me show you how you add a template to your already existing design. You basically just go add new, go add a new feature, and if you jump over to Unreal Studios, you can see that we have this new multi-user viewer. So we're going to inject that into our project by clicking the Add Project button and set up a couple things, and we'll have an experience that we can share across multiple computers with multiple users. So here we are in the multi-user template, and this is really a great starting off point because all the heavy lifting's been done for you. There's obviously some geometry inside of here that is kind of a sample file that we don't need in our presentation. So I'm going to be deleting all that, but there are a few things that you're going to want to keep. Specifically, these multiplayer starts right here. These are going to be where your players are going to spawn in, as well as these little bookmarks. So these are going to be key spots in the user experience that you can jump to with hotkeys. So those are the only things really that we want to keep as far as what's presented on the screen currently. So we're going to basically go through and delete all the geometry, and again, only keep the bookmarks and keep the player start. So the way they did this is they basically had a Revit file and they used some collision geometry, some collision volumes. We're going to be using actual geometry for the collisions in our example, so it'll be a little bit different. So we're going to blow away these collisions. And we're also going to delete, basically all the lights, all the trees, pretty much everything. We don't really need any of this stuff right here to work with our file. So we'll just kind of take all that and we'll delete it all. So now that that's done, what we want to do is we want to start to add in our geometry into the scene. So we're going to basically just drag and drop our levels into this persistent level that has all the intelligence built into it, all the kind of logic and gameplay that's been set up for this multi-user experience is all there, just waiting for our data to be added to it. So we'll jump back to the content browser and we'll grab the Revit model and we'll drop that in. So this is going to be my project basically that we've been building up. So that takes just a few seconds, and you can see when that comes in that the player starts are kind of inside of the building. So that's not ideal. So let's go ahead and grab those player starts, and we'll take all of them, and we'll just sort of translate those outside of the building. Let's find a good spot to put those. We'll kind of come over here. So the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to go ahead and change where some of these bookmarks are. So let's just see where this one is. So obviously that's not going to work out too well. Let's just kind of pull this up a couple levels. So now that we've got those all set up, the next thing that we want to do is let's get that parking lot back in here too. Let's go ahead and grab that. I think I've got that sitting in another map. Yeah, I do. So we'll drag and drop the parking lot in here too. So now that we've got our environment built, the next thing that we're going to want to do is add in some collisions. So there's a couple different ways of doing it. You could use collisions based on just volume collisions, or you can actually take geometry and create collisions from the geometry. So if you took like a piece of geometry like, I don't know, like this roof or something like that, and you go into its details, if you double click on this guy and you say show the simple collision, because that's what's going to be used by default, you'll notice there's nothing there. But if you go to the complex collision, there's going to be, kind of a low poly shape that's going to be the collision object. So what we want to do is we want to get that simple collision to be the same as the complex collision. And that's very easy to do. All you have to do is go down to your settings, and for the collision, instead of using the project default, what we're going to do is we're going to use complex as simple. So as soon as you do that, you can see that now the simple collision matches the complex collision. So what we want to do is we want to set that on a variety of objects. So you could change your project settings, or you could go through and just grab, let's grab this piece of geometry here. You can grab a whole variety of geometry. So we're going to grab all the geometry that's in the parking lot. So we'll grab all these shapes, right mouse click on top of them, and say bulk edit in property matrix. So this is a great tip. Come up here, and if you just type in collide, you can change this from property default for the collision complexity to use complex as simple. So it'll go through, and for the whole list of objects that you have currently selected, it's going to change those guys, which is exactly what you want to have happen. So once that's done, just hit Control S, and it'll go through and save this out. Okay, so now that that's done, we can close this down. So the final step is making sure that your levels are going to be displayed when you start doing a runtime experience. So you have to go into the level, and for the two that we've added, the parking lot and the Revit model, just right-click on top of it and tell it that you want the streaming method to always load. It's going to save the maps back out. And we're going to do the same thing for the Revit model. So we're going to say streaming, always load. So now that that's done, we basically have everything set up to generate the experience for a desktop. But if you wanted to have it also work with VR, you need to set up some nav meshes, which are going to allow the teleportation system to work. And this is, again, very simple to do just with a simple volume. So we're going to go ahead and go back to our mode, which is going to allow us to just search up here. And we're going to just type in nav. And with that done, we're going to grab the nav mesh. Just drag that out. And you basically just lay these around where you want to have a nav mesh generated, and it's going to go through and essentially figure out, how to solve a mesh for that. So if you hit the G key, or I'm sorry, the P key, it's going to go through, and that's basically the only area right now that I could teleport to. And you can see that it knocks out around that tree, so you can't kind of go through the tree or the other objects that it collides with. So that's basically what you're going to want to do, is you kind of add these nav meshes on all the different levels and all the different areas that you'd want to have the teleportation system work with. So with that done, we can turn off the display of that guy, and we can just jump into a quick preview of this game and see how it plays back. So here we are, and obviously I've got this cool pointer that allows me to interact and collaborate with the other people in my environment. And if I use my standard kind of first-person shooter, keys to kind of run around here and navigate, I'm in walk mode. If I hit the space bar, I've now jumped into fly mode, and now I can use other keys to start to, kind of drive up or hover or go down. It doesn't really matter what you want to do with that. We can kind of jump and hit the space bar to get out of that also. So if I wanted to, kind of just rise up here, I can just kind of fly up and get a bird's eye view of this environment. And then if I hit the space bar one more time, gravity turns on, I drop down and fall to the ground plane. So the other thing that you saw me do was set up hotkeys to jump to different key spots. So I just used my one key to jump to my first bookmark. I can jump to my second bookmark, which is kind of similar to where we were before. Then obviously I've got this other internal bookmark here. It's going to brighten up as that exposure starts to kick in, and the inside of this building looks pretty cool. You can talk about the desks or whatever you want. And obviously it's got the ground plane that I'm colliding with in this building. So then of course we've got this other ground object here, and you can see that bookmark was a little bit higher than the ground, but it just dropped me right on it. So that's basically it. So now that you've got this and we've kind of prototyped it in our scene, the next step is to package this up into a executable that multiple people can work with. So you basically give everyone the executable, and if as long as the computers can see each other, you can communicate. So to package it, it's very straightforward. Just come up here and say package, and we're going to tell it to package out as a Windows. So it's going to prepare to package, and off it goes. After the packaging is completed, you'll have an executable that you can share with anyone that you want to collaborate with in the experience. In this example, I've launched in as a host, and you can see that it's the exact same experience that we had in the editor. I still have my laser pointer, I can obviously still run around the environment, and I can still use the hotkeys to jump around to the different bookmarked positions. If there was other users in the environment with me, they'd be represented by an avatar, and that avatar would have a unique style depending on the type of experience or user they are. If it's a VR headset user, they're going to have a VR headset on their avatar, and you can see which way they're looking, and you can see their hands. So it's a very, very easy way to get up and running using these templates, and that's one of the coolest things about Unreal Studio. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the webinar. If you have any questions, don't be shy. Speak up in the chat room, and I'll do my best to answer them as many as I can. Thanks again, everybody. Cheers.
All right, so we are back, and hopefully that made sense to you guys. I was trying to cover a lot in a small amount of time, and I think it looks like the video streamed okay on my end, so hopefully there wasn't too much jittery if you guys had a broken up stream. So what we want to do is just kind of give a quick recap on the things that we saw today. So obviously in Revit, you create the view to get your export out. That's going to give us the ability to really tap into what Revit's great at, which is filtering data. So that's the first step. Then obviously the metadata comes across. That really is the magic, because that metadata allows you to do intelligent things both in the editor and in runtime. Or if you want to start to build, a set of tools around, or some pipeline tools to start automating things, having access to that metadata is going to be a huge asset for you. So obviously families are preserved. They come across as layers. So again, we're trying to bring as much information across as we can inside of the DataSmith file format. So obviously everything that we're doing utilizes that DataSmith file format, which is great because it just works. I mean, it's one of those things where it's just, you're so happy when you open your file and the fidelity of the geometry has been preserved, and the hierarchy and all the parts are there. It's a great translator. So in the engine in Unreal Studio, the important things that we saw, obviously it's working with that DataSmith file, and that again is giving us the ability to get that very high fidelity, high quality asset out of the various CAD packages. In this example, obviously Revit. We looked at how we can start to build some simple pipeline tools using Python to change shaders. So you can kind of do rinse and repeat. If you're working in an environment where you're doing similar things over and over, it's nice and efficient and important to be able to start to build some basic foundation of a pipeline around that, and Python is a great tool for that. Obviously, we looked at some of the new features that came in 4.21, specifically the new sun position. It's worth mentioning that is a plugin that has to be loaded, so you'll have to go to the plugin manager to get that to show up in your project if you want to use it, but it's pretty straightforward once you've done that. And then obviously, we talked about the metadata coming out of Revit. We're going to mention the metadata again when we're talking about the engine, because it really is the magic that's going to allow you to optimize and jump around and basically start to improve your workflow. That's the key. That's the key of the metadata. So the final thing that we looked at, which is something that I'm actually super excited about, is that multi-user template, because it basically takes something that was pretty complicated to do, and it gives it to you right out of the box. I mean, there's no reason why you can't, within a few minutes, get a Revit file into Unreal Studio and have it exported out as an executable that you can share with your colleagues or your clients super fast. So with that done, we did kind of mention that this was a demonstration. This wasn't meant to be deep learning, chaptered, very regimented learning. We do have an online learning team dedicated to building curriculum and courseware that's a little bit slower paced, that allows you to get files. There's a lot of questions in the chat about, can we get these files? Unfortunately, we don't have permissions for these files. The Python script I did send out. So go to the Unreal Studio Learning section, and you will find a ton of information, and it's being added to all the time. Eddie, who's been answering a few of the questions, works on this learning team with a variety of other individuals that are, this is their life. This is what they do every single day. They think about the courses and the classware that they want to build to help you be successful, specifically for the enterprise customers. So that is basically it. thank you so much for your time. We know you guys are very busy, and we truly appreciate you being here. I'm going to hang out. We have a variety of questions that have been popped into that Q&A section, so myself and Luthia and Eddie will do our best to try to answer as many of them as possible. And that's basically that's Unreal Studio in about 30 minutes. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Cheers, everybody. And by the way, we'll be doing another one of these in December around automotive. It'll be, again, kind of working on look development, working with actually algorithmics going to be part of the webinar. So kind of deep dive into how their substance textures work, as well as X-Rite, talking about their scanned material. So that'll be, I think it's mid-December. So look like kind of not too close to the holidays. I think it's December 17th or 18th. So keep an eye out on your calendar for that. Cheers, everybody.